Good morning. Welcome to Module 5 of our Foundations in Juvenile Healing to Wellness Court Coordination Training. This session is called More Than Rewards, Supporting Youth Recovery and Sustained Behavior Change. So welcome back, and I'll hand it off to my colleague, Jacob.
Good morning, everyone. Good to see you all for day 2. We can go to the next slide, Antonia. And just a brief disclaimer before we get started, the opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this program are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect those of the Department of Justice. I think we're going to get into introductions now. We can move on to the next slide.
Thank you. I think we have a quick opening from our Tribal Youth Ambassador.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, Antonia, if you could please pull up the video Sydney shared. Everyone who was with us yesterday got to meet our Tribal Youth Resource Center Youth Ambassador, Sydney Matheson, who opened us up yesterday, and we are excited that she's back with us again, virtually again today, to give our opening. So we'll play that video now.
White has the quick class. Hello and good morning. Welcome back to day 2 of this 2-day virtual training event on juvenile healing to wellness courts. Again, my name is Sydney Matheson. I'm a Tribal Youth Resource Center Youth Ambassador. If you peeked ahead today, there's some touches on self-care. And as somebody who wears many hats, self-care becomes really important in my life. I am not in school right now because of summer break. School starts back up on the 19th. But when I am in school, I am always at least taking 5 classes a quarter, 5 credits a class. I work all year long. I have 2 jobs. I'm a CNA in both, one in a full-time facility for my own tribe. And that one I go above and beyond for because those are like my own grandparents. And then I work like up to and over 72-hour week sometimes. Other than that, I'm home a lot with my grandparents and my mom and my little siblings. I'm also an involved auntie. And self-care looks different for everybody. Sometimes you have to find something that works for you. Sometimes it'll be a glass of water. Ground yourself. Water helps everything. It helps your skin, stress, dehydration. Sometimes it'll be a walk. And then sometimes that walk will become the most important part of your day because it's for your sanity. And this morning, I just wanted to start us off with a quote. And this quote has stuck with me since I was probably about 13. I read it on a Facebook post. It's from a college professor. I don't remember the name, but the quote read, "We all have a little bit of, I want to save the world in us. And that's why we're all here today. I want you to know that it's okay if you only save one world. It's okay if that world is yours. But I want you to know that all of the kids you're here helping, they see it and they deserve your help. And I think it's totally awesome. Like I said yesterday, I'm excited to see what all comes from you all being here. Remember to drink water, stretch, take breaks as needed. And thank you for having me again. Limlet, have a good day."
And I know Sydney's not joining us live, but if you all have an opportunity to visit our tribalyouth.org website, you can actually visit the page that says Youth Hub, and we have our youth ambassadors with their photos and their bios, and you can learn more about the youth that are participating in that initiative. And we have appreciated getting connected to all of them. They're all doing amazing things in their own communities, and many of them are now transitioning into college, some into graduate programs. And so it's just really exciting to be connected with them and to be re-energized in our work when we do talk to them about the different things that we're planning, and getting to invite them into the conversation and have them participate in the way that we're approaching our work and what we're doing. So I hope that that was an encouraging start to your day, just to hear from one of our young people. And yeah, I'll hand it to my colleagues to introduce themselves, and then I'll introduce myself, and we'll get into today's content. So Jacob.
Morning, everyone. Jacob Metoxen, Oneida from Wisconsin. I'm training and technical assistant specialist with TYRC. I'm excited to be here. Appreciate your presence today, and looking forward to the conversation with our guest, Erin Thinelk.
Thanks, Jacob. This is Erin Thinelk, and I am Sicangu Lakota. My background is I'm an MSW, and I live in my Dakota homelands in Minnesota. I'm really excited to be here with you today. I just wanted to thank Sydney, because that was a wonderful opening, and I know she's not here with us today, but it reminds me so much about, it's so important to have youth at the table when we are here for them and for their recovery and sustained behavior change. And I always think about something that I heard from youth, and they were like, nothing about us without us. And so sometimes I think as professionals, we get together and think we have all the answers and know everything. And but it's always so important to have them at the table. And I just wanted to share one other thing too, that I was speaking with an elder one time a couple years back, and he had shared about, if you want to know the wisdom of the community, you listen to the elders, but if you want to know the truth of the community, you listen to the youth. So I think it's so important that we're here today, and I'm really looking forward to spending this time with you.
Thank you, Erin. And we can go to the next slide. I'm going to let Dave and Chanel say hello again. So I think both of you are on. Feel free to introduce yourselves and say hello to the group. I know we have several that joined from yesterday, but in case anyone's new, feel free to reintroduce yourself.
I'm Dave MacArthur. I work with the White Earth Nation as a juvenile healing the wellness court manager and circle back case manager, and Oshki Monitor Youth Program case manager. My background is in law enforcement. I worked 13 years or so in law enforcement. I have a couple different areas that have come from, and just looking forward to learning some today from you guys.
Okay, everyone. My name is Chanel Grant. I am the coordinator for the Blackfeet Juvenile and Adult Healing Wellness Support Projects in Montana. I have a social work background, and I've been here from the beginning to help build these programs from the ground up. So I'm looking forward to the presentations today, and thank you all for being here today.
Thank you. And my name is Anna Clough. I'm Muskogee and Yuchi. I serve as the co-director for the Tribal Youth Resource Center, and I have the privilege of working with our Juvenile Healing to Wellness Court tribal grantees. So if you were here yesterday, feel free to type in the chat. I did ask a couple of questions in there. And if you're new joining us today, welcome. We're glad that you're here. We have another full day of training, and we did record all the sessions from yesterday. So after the training ends, we will be sending out some follow-up materials, and we will also be sending out links to all of our archived training videos. That might not be right after the training, but it will be sometime very soon. So we'll make sure you all are connected to those. So we can go to the next slide. All right, so we've made it to module 5. We're in day 2, and today we are going to be talking about supporting youth behavior change, and that includes how we respond to both positive and negative behaviors as youth are participating in their case plans that you all are developing and coordinating with them. And then we are going to be looking at several tools that might help you as you're considering how you're wanting to apply your responses to youth. And so I'm very glad to have Erin here to talk about a youth goal setting tool that might be helpful to you all as you're thinking about how to work with the youth and identify things that are important to them and things that can help them on this journey that they're on. So let's get into it. We can go to the next slide.
And then just a friendly reminder of the 10 key components. You have an opportunity to look at them. A lot of information regarding sustainable change pertaining to your youth participants, and just overall the components recognize community involvement, family relationships, and parent caregiver involvement, culture and tradition, and exercise of tribal sovereignty. And we've got a link here. We'll share the PowerPoint with you all afterwards. I'd highly recommend looking at them. The key components are a good reminder and a good way to kind of reset your vision on your healing and wellness court. And we'll move on to the next slide.
All right, thanks, Jacob. So today, as you know, we're talking about sustaining behavior change in youth development. So before we start on this journey, we wanted to get you in that frame of mind and ask you the question, what are some things that motivate you? So if you can type in the chat, sit back, think for a second. If there's something that you wanted to do in the past week, in the past year, I know that a lot of times, you know, around the January month, people will think that they're going to change. For some of us, the new year starts at other times of the year during our different ceremonies and things. But if you could think about what are some things that motivate you to make change, and please share that in the chat or feel free to unmute. And these could be positive things. These could be maybe some negative consequences, like, you know, the jeans aren't quite, you know, fitting as well. Or the fact that when you do go on walks, you see how amazing it connects you with your kids and how much they smile. Okay, great. Starting to come in. Anna, do you want to help me or Jacob?
Sure, we can tag team. So we have one person that shared, Peggy, seeing the youth that I work with on a regular basis gets me excited to go see me when I'm out in the public or at school. I know then that I'm making a positive, okay, I see. I know then that I'm making a positive influence in their life in some way. So they get excited to see her, that motivates her in turn because she knows she's making an influence. And then I think I shared at the start, you know, getting to work with our youth ambassadors. When we connect with them, I feel more motivated because I hear some of the things that they're sharing. Sydney, who shared the opening this morning, one of her reasons for joining the youth ambassadors was that she wants to start a juvenile justice system in her community because she feels like there's not something there for them. So I think when you hear things like that from young people, it really motivates you to just stay connected and keep moving forward in what we're doing because we know that it is impacting communities and individuals.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Maybe there's a certain time of the year that motivates you, something within your culture or within the community that motivates you.
I know Anna and Laura know this about me. What motivates me is Air Jordan sneakers. I really love them. I'm a big fan. So anytime I can get some new sneakers, I'm always motivated to have a good day that day. And then we've got some more comments from Miss Buckmeyer. Just seeing a need for change motivates me to help. Oh, and sunshine. Mm-hmm. That's a big factor. Your environment, everything around you, and just the ability to enjoy the outdoors is always a recharge for me as well.
Lisa shared things that motivate me having people I can trust and lean on when I need support, Frustration with the situation also motivates me both in a positive and sadly a negative way. Yep, I think we all understand that.
And Michelle, good to see you on, Michelle. Learning what didn't work and trying to figure out how to redo what we need to change or implementing something else. And I think that goes to our conversations yesterday during yesterday's modules about not having perfect expectations, but looking at any sorts of obstacles as opportunities to learn and make your programming better.
Absolutely. So it's really important, I think, as when we're talking about things that looking at what can motivate the youth within our programs, what are motivating ourselves, what's motivating the team that we're working with. You know, we have to be cognizant and in touch with what's going on with our own lives and what's motivating ourselves in order to help with change. All right, maybe we can go to the next slide. We had one other discussion point that we wanted to hear from. All right, so we checked in with you about what motivates yourself. Now, what are some of the ways that we motivate others? Well, that right there, Amy, you said getting to work with my best friend. You guys are motivating each other, so that's awesome.
Being present, we got that. Chenille, thank you. Motivated by my family. I have an amazing support system. We cheer each other on. So that's a way we motivate others too. Encouragement, cheering each other on when we see them progressing or having a success or experiencing something positive in their life. There's some good ones. Telling each other good morning, even if the person is not having a good morning.
Trying to stay positive and encouraging, incentive, support, being consistent. I think that's a big one. Consistency, being somebody that others know that they can rely on.
And Maud shared, letting them know you believe in them and are there to support them, showing up for them. I think showing up is huge.
Oh, we've got this is actually Danita. Oh, thank you, Danita, for clarifying. Validating others' work and attempts to complete projects or telling them they are needed. That's a big one. You know, letting people know that their work is valuable.
We got a lot of good feedback on this one, so I'm hoping I'm not missing any. But if we do, thank you for sharing. I see making plans that work for my friend, holding each other accountable on a task. I need that a lot. Thank you, Laura, for always holding me accountable. Let's see. Awesome coworkers wanting to make a change.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. You had a lot of awesome feedback that motivated me to go on to the next slide and start the conversation today.
Yay. So everybody's favorite image, if you are working in wellness courts, I think at some point you will probably memorize every single one of these components. Maybe we'll send you a card. Actually, I think TLPI does have a laminated desktop 10 key components. So if you come to one of the trainings, ask for one of those because I'm pretty sure that we give those out pretty often. But these, again, are the components that we look to in Healing to Wellness Court. And since we're talking specifically about Juvenile Healing to Wellness Court, I know yesterday in our Module 2, we talked more specifically about Juvenile Healing to Wellness Court, but we're just continuously going back to this overall framework for the work that we're doing. And when we talk about this incentives and sanctions or responses to behavior, we're looking at this area at the bottom where we're in support and supervision and discipline and encouragement. And I think when we use the word discipline, we're talking more about personal accountability and accountability to others, not the traditional ideas I think that come to mind when you hear that word discipline. So we can be self-disciplined in many things in our work and the way that we conduct ourselves. And so just viewing it in that mindset and not necessarily the negative connotation of discipline that comes to mind.
Yeah, and I just wanted to jump in because I think from another perspective, it's really showing and teaching the youth about boundaries and respecting themselves. And a lot of times maybe in their life or just in the stage of youth development, learning how to set boundaries for themselves and what they will allow in their life. I think that's so important. And if a program is able to let them understand that process and teach them as a way of this component, I think that's really beneficial life skill for long term.
For sure. And we can go to the next slide, and we're going to specifically look at the Tribal Healing to Wellness Court key component 6. So in treatment court settings, so you'll see in the adult drug court model, the Tribal Healing to Wellness Court model, and then in the Juvenile Healing to Wellness Court, this common component of rewards and then responses to support behavior change, to motivate behavior change, to encourage and respond to both positive and negative behaviors. So this is a key component in the framework. And across the board, you're going to see the implementation of this strategy in some way. Not all courts do this the same. And we're going to talk about a few different ways that you can apply responses and incentives in your program, and ways that communities are able to support those youth that are in the program and acknowledge the progress that they're making, and then also support them in their own personal accountability and expectations related to the plans that they're agreeing to. And if you haven't gone to the Wellness Court's publication section, this manual, the Tribal Healing to Wellness Court Key Components, this is, I call it like the giant handbook. I think it's over 300 pages. So there's a big section of material on this key component. And so I would encourage you to check that out, read through it, see how the different ideas and things might apply to the work that you're doing. Some things may apply, some things might not apply, but it's just good to take in that knowledge and be able to consider things that other communities have done in this area. All right, let's go to the next slide. So this idea of reward, so in most of the literature, you're going to see incentives and sanctions. When we started working on our national training materials, one of the things that we wanted to transition to was strengths-based language. And so a lot of the time when our team refers to this incentives and sanctions topic, we will say incentives and then consequences for negative behavior or just general responses to negative behavior. We don't always include the word sanctions, but if you're looking at material related to this, you're going to see incentives and sanctions pretty much in all the adult drug court material, and then even in some of the Tribal Healing to Wellness Court material. So if you're looking for information about this, you may type in incentives and sanctions, and you can find a lot already out there on this topic. But the reason that the courts do this is related to this idea about contingency management, and it's really about positive reinforcement to support the change in behavior. And so it's the consistency related to your team engaging with the youth and supporting that positive behavior change. And so usually what you'll see in the language is graduated incentives and sanctions. And what that means is that the intensity or level of response is going to change related on the progress of that youth through the case process. And that's their involvement in the court, their involvement involvement with your team, and then the response that your team is going to have to the behavior that is being exhibited. And that's both positive and negative behaviors. So when you see a youth making even incremental progress, there's time there for your team to just continue to encourage them and help them as they're making even small choices that are putting them on a better path. And because the Juvenile Healing to Wellness Court is supposed to be a therapeutic environment, it's really important for your team, if you have an individual in your community that is going to be serving as the treatment provider or as the individual who's going to be helping with a counseling or treatment plan, to be a part of this conversation as you all are thinking about how are we going to manage this part of the court. So really important to have that individual being a part of these conversations and not just kind of randomly designating a list of ideas. And there's a lot of great ideas out there that other courts are implementing, but it's nice to have somebody there local that's going to be working with the youth in your program to be able to be a part of this conversation about, what kind of environment are we trying to create? What are some of the therapeutic responses that will be a part of their case management plan? And then how is the court going to be responding to certain behaviors that are exhibited by the youth participant? Erin, if you have anything else you want to share about this.
I think motivational interviewing training for any of the staff would be absolutely a wonderful training to attend. Motivational interviewing really looks at inspiring hope and restoring balance towards positive behavior change. It's a set of principles and techniques that specifically looks at motivating change. And so it really can help with sustaining behavior change and through basically checking in with the youth and on a level where it is a relative, it is not just a client, it's not just somebody in the program, it's honoring the wisdom that's within them. And you are acting as a mirror and you're reflecting back to them their experiences or the things that they're saying. And so it really is reframing things to be very strength-based. And like I said, it just really helps to motivate and move along in that readiness for change, that process. So I would really highly recommend motivational interviewing training for any of the staff. And it's evidence-based for many different disorders across the board, for diabetes, for gambling, for heart disease. But for the Native American population, it's evidence-based for substance use and changing those behaviors. So it also, the other thing that's really great about it is it really improves the effectiveness of cognitive behavioral therapy, which often we see the youth going into therapy as part of their plan. And so the cognitive behavioral therapy is really looking at changing their thinking patterns, and MI has been shown to improve the effectiveness of CBT. So I think it's a really great area to have training in.
Thank you, Erin. I think that's a great segue. We can go into the next slide. So one of the things I wanted to share is, being part of the Tribal Youth Resource Center and working with tribal communities is that we're always encouraging that the approach that you're using is the one that works best for your community. So when we see these different applications of theory that are applied in different treatment court settings, I think that there is value in considering the way that those work and seeing outcomes for other youth, and knowing that many juvenile drug treatment courts are using an incentives and sanctions framework, and we know that there is value in encouraging people and helping spur that behavior change. But as you all consider what methodologies in your court to help support that behavior change, just applying what's known locally, because I think a lot of the literature and the studies and all this data that's floating around out there often doesn't include, you know, our tribal youth and what we see happening in our tribal communities. So just considering that and knowing that you're able to adapt these other ideas to what you think is going to specifically help the youth in your community. And I think we're all in this situation of, you know, we apply something, we see if it works. If it doesn't work well, that's why it's so important to have that data collection and evaluation process in place as you all are starting to consider the ways that you're responding to youth and applying this in your healing to wellness court. So just with that, I wanted to share that in wellness court, I think there is a transition from general treatment court setting to how we want to be with our within our community. So I think there is a more traditional approach to healing and wellness. I think we see a more restorative approach in working with our youth. I'm really encouraged by many communities who are starting to integrate elders panels and other ways of community members coming into the wellness court framework and being a part of the process. And we know that youth are encouraged to participate in cultural activities and get reconnected. And so you all as a team are identifying or providing those opportunities for them to develop relationships, to strengthen their relationships with peers that can support and motivate that behavior change, and really inviting them to become connected with other community members that they might not be currently connected with, so that they can have those positive influences in their life. And then over the course of them being involved in the program, you know, developing that trust with you all as a team, increasing these natural connections, and for you all to help them, you know, Erin just shared earlier, understanding them, knowing what's valued by them, being able to really support them in a way that goes beyond just static responses to behavior. So I think that's more of a relational approach to this incentives and sanctions process. And so going into it with that mindset, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. All right, we can go to the next slide. Erin, I don't know if you want to share on this.
Sure. I think, you know, as Native peoples, we all have roles in our community and certain responsibilities. I mean, we might have gone away and gotten different degrees or have different experiences, but we also are mothers and grandmothers or uncles or grandpas, and we all have these different roles within the community. And it's never been the nuclear family. It's never been up to just solely the father and the mother to raise the children. It's the extended family. It's the community has an investment in all the youth in order to have a successful community for the future. And so there's always these ways of interacting through community gatherings, through ceremony, you know, through all these different ways of being Indigenous. And within those ways of interacting and connecting to culture, it's really building up protective factors and really building resiliency against a lot of the things that our youth are going up against, that we're seeing, the reasons why they're in court. So it's really, really important to know that culture is so important. I think culture as prevention is probably one of the most important things to think about when we are building these programs, when we're running these programs. So much of the things that we are trying to reteach were already the blueprint in our communities. So, you know, really drawing from the strength of our elders and our gatherings and our teachings and our values and our ceremonies, you know, tap into that as part of the program. And I think you'll really see the benefits of it.
I think, and Chanel or Dave, feel free to chime in on this, but as the youth are drawn closer to the team and building that relationship, do you see that personal accountability, they begin to identify that more, the accountability to the community? I think strengthening those relationships and building that relational atmosphere, I think, can contribute in this area. And either one of you, feel free to share. I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot.
Yeah, you can, when you start building that relationship with those kids, I think they finally have someone to kind of look up to. And when they it's really crazy, like if they let you down, or if they think they let you down, how bad they feel about that, and how they strive hard in order to work to achieve even more, And then with our traditional ways of doing things, with bringing in the elders and bringing in the different people to talk to the kids, I think they start seeing that there's actually people in the community that care. A lot of the times we don't see that, or they don't hear that. They just hear the negative, about them running around and raising Cain and doing those things, and those positive interactions that they can have with the community and with the elders and aunties and uncles and everybody in the community. It really makes them strive to try to do better and realize that people aren't against them, aren't out there against them. They're there to help support them and help them get going in the right way.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's really true. You through these programs and connecting them to their culture, that connectedness really is reinforced with these programs. So what I noticed a lot is, the more you interact with these kids, you see a change in them, their self-esteem, their even the sense of advocating for themselves. They really learn how to grow into their own strength. And I think that these programs really help connect kids to that part of their identity. And I think that's really important, is that resilience, is really reinforced through the programming. And especially if you're drawing your strengths from your culture, from your own values and your own culture.
Well, research shows that the more culturally connected our youth are, they have increased self-efficacy, they have better short and long-term health outcomes. So connecting to our culture is incredibly important.
Erin, it looks like we got a comment from Peggy Whitebird. We say culture is prevention, so we try to make cultural activities and events to help our youth. Maybe you talk a little bit about the events and activities you see.
That I see? Oh yeah, sure, absolutely. Well, tapping into any of the traditional, so a lot of our communities, right, we have a cultural or calendar, something that happens throughout the year, all of our different ceremonies or events. So, tapping into that annually, that's amazing. Like coming of age ceremonies, things that can really help the youth connect to the culture, really understand important life skills. Connecting to family, connecting to elders in the community, connecting to older peer mentors, other things, maybe they're interested in making regalia and learning how to dance. Let's see what else, learning how to make traditional harvesting and making traditional medicines. There's just so many things. There's so many things that are amazing about our culture that I've seen occurring in all different kinds of communities.
One thing I think worth mentioning, and I kind of joked about it earlier about the Michael Jordan thing, but even just sports, lacrosse, basketball, tournaments, those sorts of things. I know that physical activity had a big part of me personally making certain lifestyle changes for myself. And just that, I think that's a reward in itself to, that feeling after being physical or just being part of a team and playing in front of your family and stuff like that.
Absolutely. And just the natural of going out, for some of those of you that, haven't been able to go to ceremony and go out, or that's not part of your culture or practice, maybe it's something similar to like camping. When you go away from everyone and kind of put electronics down, everyone just naturally, you have to all fix something to eat. You all have to, help if a storm comes. It's like all that gathering together and really connecting, and it's amazing. And so all of those different those connections happen naturally when you are out and away from Facebook and Instagram and all those things. So those are some of the
Yeah, I like all the things you shared. And I was also thinking of, when you're trying to help people reconnect or, experience new things or connect with people they've not been connected with before. I like one of our coordinators a couple of years back shared, and I thought this was an activity that would be really good for youth who are maybe they're just coming into the program, but they did a walk around the community and talked about, these are the naming of places. And he shared, this is what we call this is why we call this place this. And to me, that was like connecting them to the land, giving them, helping them to embrace, this is our home. And this is why we place this certain thing, and teaching them in their language. And so to me, it was almost like scaling, right? Like they're just coming to the program. How can I kind of introduce you to some of these concepts? And Chanel, I won't call you again, but I know that you're doing some cultural teaching in your program as well. So lots to be learned. I love our conversations. I think we could sit on this slide for probably the whole session, but we'll keep moving forward. And I will let you all hear from Chanel and Dave about some of the different things that they've brought in. So let's move to the next slide. Okay, so we have talked about this, I think, over and over again, but we are moving into a strengths-based approach. We are moving away from, in the wellness course, we're moving away from punitive responses and deficit-based approaches. And so we're not trying to catch people, we're not trying to shame people, we are trying to meet their therapeutic needs. And we do want to reduce recidivism. The hope is that as we're implementing the Juvenile Healing to Wellness Court, that we are placing these youth on a different trajectory and that we will not see them entering into the adult court system. I think that's our goal, working in prevention, is to support these youth into never entering an adult system. I mean, that's why we're here. That's why we're doing this work, and we want to reduce recidivism. So how can we do that without moving into these control environments or these military style programs, or ones that we really just, want to put fear in them and shame them for the bad conduct. And so I think that's where we're moving with the wellness court approach, is to transition from that application of justice. So let's go to the next slide. Many juvenile programs, generally, many juvenile courts are focusing on rehabilitation. So that's definitely not an across the board thing, but I think that there's a greater movement towards reducing that style of program and response for youth. So as we begin to look at incentives and responses to behavior, there is some really great information in the Juvenile Drug Treatment Court guidelines as you all begin this process and start to bring youth into the court. As you begin to apply both incentives and consequences for behavior, always going back to these principles. And so they should be meaningful. So they should mean something to that youth. There needs to be fairness in the way that you're applying them. There needs to be certainty, so youth have an expectation of what's going to happen. What's happening when there's a positive thing that goes on, what happens when there's a negative thing that's going on. So a certain expectations for what's going to happen when they're going to court or going to the program or going to whatever it is, that meeting that you're having with them. For youth specifically, and for those families that you're working with, it should be understandable. And so communicating very early on, this is how we respond to behavior in our juvenile healing to wellness court. So making it very clear and understandable for the youth and for their family. And then equitable. And so when we say equitable, that does tie into fairness, but it also is you're applying these. So if you have a group of youth, if you have one youth in your program, they don't see anything different being applied. If you have 10 youth in your program, and for this youth, when you responded to this behavior in this way, then you have this other youth, you responded to a behavior in a different way, there's a sense of equity. Are you applying these things across the board fairly, no matter the station of youth? So beyond the activity, and when we say individualized and responding fairly, we do know that we need to be looking at specific circumstances, but there should be a general sense of fairness and equity in the way that you're applying your incentives and your consequences. All right, next slide. So we will include a link to the Juvenile Drug Treatment Court guidelines in your materials, but whenever you go to a publication, you can look at guideline 1.4, and you'll see that language that we shared earlier about contingency management, and that's kind of the theory-based language related to this approach. All right, next slide. Okay, so how do we apply meaningful responses to behavior? And this is kind of an open-ended question. Feel free to use the chat. Erin and I are going to talk a little bit more about meaningfulness in these responses. But how can we make sure that we are enacting meaningful responses to youth behavior? When we get to the next slide, Erin, I'll bring that up. I'll see if anyone chats anything in.
I think as you're thinking about this question and meaningful responses to behavior, I always go back to the theoretical foundation of Prochaska and De Clementi's theoretical change, or the theoretical stages of change, and knowing that there's like about seven stages of change that we all go through: preparation, action, I can't remember the other ones, pre-contemplation, contemplation. And so as you're thinking about a meaningful response, realizing and remembering that readiness to change, it's not always steady. It can kind of go back and forth. So keeping that theory in mind, and how do we have these meaningful responses if they are ebbing and flowing? Looks like we're getting some.
Oh, sorry, making sure the reward or consequence matches the behavior. Talking to the minors to see what interests them. Great segue into our next slide. Teaching to go with the consequence or reward. Yep, thank you. Example, a positive substance screen might warrant screens to happen more often or more support. These are all awesome answers. Making sure you are considering the person in mind. They has to be something that motivates them. Sanctions can be therapeutic too. Yes. So let's go to the next slide. And our response to that was through knowing. So knowing the youth, what matters to them, what's important to them, what do they value? And that's for both incentives and our responses. And so part of this is directly tied to the way that you're doing your assessment and your orientation. So are you providing an opportunity where that youth is able to share the things that are important to them? And then also goal setting. And we're actually going to bring up a tool that Erin's going to talk about that can help you understand, what are they motivated to accomplish? What are some things that they're aspiring to do? It can be through your informal relationship. So as you're building that trust and sharing and having open communication with them. And when I say informal, I mean as opposed to formal, like these formal assessment tools or other processes. And then knowing what matters specifically to this youth. So helping identify their strengths, their interests, their hopes, and their visions. And Antonia, if you'll let me share, and Erin's going to share a little bit about a tool that you can use with your youth, and this is free and it's available online. So just tell me to scroll, Erin, if you need me to move.
Sure. Okay, so this is the personal balance tool, and it was created by the Youth Council for the Fresno American Indian Health Project. They created it, and it's free for any American Indian communities throughout. It's part of their Go in a Process gathering of Native Americans for generosity. So basically, this is a really great tool. You can sit down with the youth, and they go through and basically score. The scale was up at the top, and it's basically, yeah, if you want to go right there. So that's the scale. It's 0 to 4, so very true, very untrue, all the way to very true. And then you go ahead and scroll down, Anna. And so they walk through this. Either you can do this with them as building rapport, getting to know them. Maybe as they're answering some of these questions, there might be some additional follow-up just to get to know them. But they can sit down, and they will put down a score for where they think they're at with regard to each of those questions. If you notice, those are color-coded, and there's a reason for that. That goes to the medicine wheel. So it's a medicine wheel approach. So the questions are basically are in 4 quadrants. And the 4 quadrants obviously are for the medicine wheel, which is physical, emotional, spiritual, and mental. And so they coordinate to the 4 quadrants of the medicine wheel. And they can, if they want to, go ahead and color in. Basically, if they got a 0, there wouldn't be any color. If they felt like they were at a 3 for that particular, like for 13, for that question 13, they would color up to 13. So it's a interactive process. By the end of it, they'll have a visual. You'll have a visual. It's a visual that they can share with their therapist or anybody else on the team. And so what happens is they see, yeah, right there, perfect. What they'll see is where perhaps they need to have a higher score and set some goals to have more balance within those specific areas. So you can see the east is spiritual, south is emotional, west is physical, and north is mental. So the next part is basically where you just have a discussion with them, and you start thinking about how do you have balance within all of those areas of your life, and start asking them, like, what would be a goal so that you are starting to feel better physically? Do you like to shoot hoops? Is there something that, and they might be like, well, yeah, I really did like to go to the gym, but I can't afford, the membership. Well, maybe that's something that could be written in as a goal if they are able to progress through the program. Perhaps maybe a gym membership or something like that could be an incentive. So this is them setting their own goals, really looking at the strengths within themselves, setting their own goals, and the program can match incentives ideally to go along with the goals. So it's a helpful tool.
I think that's really important, not only, as you're trying to establish and build rapport with the youth that are in the program, but if you are a grantee, and have to go back to, there are some data collection and performance measures tied to your grant. So if you are a tribal grantee and you're operating under federal funding, I think there's also some considerations for your reporting requirements. And so obviously this is for the benefit of your youth and your program, and for you all gaining understanding and building a relationship and really knowing the areas or those things in life that that youth is working on. But at the same time, there's also a benefit for your team to have a baseline of understanding of, you know, this youth came into our program, this is where they were at the start. In 3 months or 6 months, we revisit this personal balance tool, and we've seen this area of growth, or we've seen this area of expansion. And so then as you all are doing that progress reporting, you're able to share, you know, we've been engaging with this youth, these are the things that we've been doing, these are the activities that they've been involved in, and this is really where we're seeing some progress and growth specifically for this youth. And these are some of the things that were tied to where we see some of those natural things that are occurring, that are, you know, they're growing, progressing. So really, I think a helpful tool. There's other youth goal setting tools out there. We actually have a couple of our team members that we outreach to include some things in your packet. And then we also want to do some follow-up training in this area. So plenty of information about goal setting. And thank you, Erin, for walking through that example. I think that's a really great, it's a great tool because it was developed by youth. And so I think that that's also an important aspect of if you decide to use that.
Yeah, and the medicine wheel, I mean, so many of our communities, you know, it's something that's already a part. I mean, we think about that in our a lot of our teachings, a lot of our values, and you know, sometimes we forget that even for ourselves, like, gosh, where am I at with this, you know? And so it's just, yeah, it's a really great goal setting tool. And the other thing I just wanted to remind everyone is, like SAMHSA says, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, that, you know, there are many pathways to recovery. And so even though we might have the youth within, you know, therapy and meeting different people to help, perhaps, you know, in their goal setting, their path to recovery is more physical, maybe being more active is helping them, or maybe, you know, so they can find that out. They can set those goals. And like I said, the path to recovery is it's unique, and there's many different ways of getting there.
Thank you. All right, let's go on to the second item, and that is fairness. So Juvenile Drug Treatment Court Guideline 5.2 talks about fairness. And so as you all are applying incentives and responses, having similar responses for participants is very important. Youth have an innate sense of unfairness. So if they see things being unfairly applied, there could be some issues, especially with respecting what the court is doing, respecting how the team is responding. And so I think that it goes for all of us. I think we all have this idea that, you know, we see something, especially if we're working in this field of justice. I think everybody in this room probably has some feelings when you see something being unfairly applied to anyone. But for the youth that are involved in your program, you know, giving them that sense of fairness. And I think that goes back to our conversation yesterday. So if you're trying to apply a trauma-informed approach in your program, you know, there's some aspects there of building trust because they see that the way that your team is working with them and with others is being done in a fair manner. So very important, valuable to consider the way that you're applying your incentives and your responses. And there is a note here about similarity without violating the principles of consistency. So you can have something that's fair for one in consideration of some of the specific needs of that family. So it's not saying that every single thing is applied exactly the same across the board every single time, but it is saying that there should be a sense of fairness in the way that you all are making decisions and the way that you're responding to the youth. And that can include providing explanation. It's not necessarily that the youth all need to know each other's business and what's going on, but if there is an open docket where you kind of have that group setting happening, there needs to be an explanation for why your team is responding in a certain way for those youth. Chanel, I saw you lean forward. If you have anything to share, feel free. I know you can interject at any point in time. Okay, we can go to the next slide. I think there's some more commentary on fairness. So allowing youth to express their feelings, being neutral and fact-based in your decision-making. So as your team is meeting together, I know for a lot of us, and we've had many wellness court team members share, this is in our communities. And so it's very likely that at some point you're working with a youth or a family that you already know, or you may be related to, or there's some other aspect of what's going on in this youth's life that you may have external information, you may know some things that are going on. I think that occurs a lot, and we've had some conversations about how do we balance that, because we know that when we have a wellness court in a smaller community, there may be information that's shared even before a team gets to meet about it. And so just applying a neutrality in the way that you're making decisions for your responses in your incentives, and then always treating the youth with respect. That's really important. You're trying to build rapport with them, so there should be a sense of respect and decorum if you're doing this in the court. And I think if you're doing this elsewhere, if you're working with an elders panel, some of those teachings on how do we engage with each other in a respectful way, I think that's very important. Acting out of caring and benevolent motives. So the reason that you're responding in this way is because you do care about that youth. You want to respond to the behavior, both positive behavior and negative behavior. And then with dignity, I think that you want your youth to come into the space knowing that there is that sense of respect for who they are as a community member, as a fellow human. We're treating each other with respect and acknowledging the dignity of those that are coming before us. All right, we can go to the next slide. Okay, another aspect of applying incentives and sanctions is certainty. And we shared this before. It's very important that you all respond quickly. And so most of what we see in the treatment court setting is that there should be a sense of immediacy and certainty in what's going to occur. So if a behavior occurs, and this is even positive behavior, you want to acknowledge that as soon as you can. So if they come into a hearing or into court and they've done something really great that week, or they've made some progress that week, acknowledging that and spending the time to actually say, great job in this specific thing, like you made it to all your appointments this week, you did a great job communicating with your case manager or with the team, that applause and some of those other things that we'll look at later as far as your response. And then if there was some negative behavior, something's going on in the home, maybe a conflict with a parent or a peer or something going on at school, there needs to be some immediacy there so that you're addressing the behavior quickly. And there should be written expectations that you give to the youth as part of their orientation or their intake process, and explaining on a regular basis. So if you need to re-explain something so that there's clarity and that there's understanding, your team is willing to do that, and that you're all on the same page about how you're going to be responding to certain behaviors or continued behaviors. All right, next slide. Okay, your approach should be understandable. And so we've shared this over and over, but there should be some kind of handbook or formal written policies that your participants have access to. And I know that teams commonly differentiate their working policies and procedures with the handbook that your youth will receive. And so those are usually distilled down to the areas that are most applicable to the youth for their role in the court. And so it'll be the expectations that you have for them. If you are applying incentives and responses, we've seen some that give a general list, and then there's some courts that are using a point system. And so you might see, for this many times that you are doing this certain behavior, this is our response. for if it's a negative behavior, you know, here's a list of consequences that might occur if this or these are the behaviors that you're demonstrating. So those expectations are made clear from the start. And I think this also goes to due process. So if you have youth who are voluntarily entering into the juvenile healing to wellness court, there's a sense of due process in that they understand what they're signing up for before they get involved in the juvenile healing to wellness court, and also that their family understands what the expectations of the court is for them. Being a part of the process and supporting their supporting that individual and all the expectations that your team has of them. And if they don't understand, I put check exclamation mark. So making sure they do understand, and you can do this in a variety of ways. You can read through something with them, have them check each item and sign off. You can give them the orientation, have them sit with their parent, have them read through, have them speak back to you that they understood everything that was shared with them that day. So I think that you want to make sure that they understand when they're coming into the program, that you all are communicating very clearly what the expectations are. And that's throughout the process. So not just at orientation, but any expectations that you all give to them as part of their case management plan, communicating often and communicating clearly. All right, next slide. Okay, so we want to talk a little bit about equity, and so making sure that you're treating the families and the youth that are coming in equitably, ensuring that you're applying the criteria that you all decide as part of your court entry criteria, the application of your screening and assessment processes, so making sure that those are applied clearly and fairly, and then equity and access. So you're giving opportunities that are equally available for all youth. And so, and that's just in their station, and then as, you know, what they can actually benefit from in the program. And so, you know, we just shared that youth have different interests. So you might be hosting different activities, and maybe, you know, one youth is way more interested in that activity than others, you know, making sure that everyone has access to something, but it may not be something that's necessarily of interest to them. So you can do something equitably without it being forced, or also without them missing out on that opportunity. And then going back to this idea of procedural fairness and due process. So if you are housing this program in your court, also going back to any statutory authority or any constitutional rights that your youth have. And so always viewing it in that sense that there may be things above this court that tell us, you know, the way that we need to be engaging with youth and applying our services and our activities in a way that aligns with our community's laws and ordinance and statutes. So I know we had to go there because we're talking about court systems, but, you know, envisioning this through a due process lens, I think, is important as well. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. And Erin, I want to make sure we have time for our breakout groups. So I'm going to look at this really quickly. Thank you all for bearing with us. I think we have lots of great conversations. So incentives. So as you apply incentives, and I've seen a lot of literature that says, you know, obviously we want more incentives than sanctions. I've seen a 4-to-1 ratio, but I think that the goal is you're recognizing positive behavior more than you are trying to catch. You're not trying to catch people, you're trying to acknowledge negative behaviors. So for every consequence or sanction, you know, trying to instill a level of rewards or acknowledgement of that success. So 4-to-1 ratio. All right, we can go to the next slide. Erin, I think we talked a little bit about this already, but feel free to add more here.
Yeah, I think we talked about, you know, matching incentives, possibly to like the goal setting with the youth. You know, if you've had youth in the program previously, you know, getting feedback from them on incentives, maybe establishing some guidelines for incentives. Maybe you're going to follow the medicine wheel and have incentives based upon the 4 the 4 directions. Maybe you're going to look at SAMHSA's 8 dimensions of wellness. Maybe you're going to follow your own values for incentives within your community. So those are just a few things, few ideas.
All right, we can go to the next slide. So as you all have to respond to non-compliance, because we know that there's probably going to be challenges that the youth continue to face as they come into the program. We know that they are administered when the youth does not comply with their program or their expectations. And you can see guideline 5.1 for that. And let's go to the next slide. These should also be applied in the same framework as incentives. And so punishment is not the goal. The goal is to support the change in behavior. And so you can see that there's continued support for the youth in acknowledging and addressing behavior. And you want to do that in the same way that you're acknowledging incentives. And so the sense of immediacy and certainty, still fair related to the extent of the behavior, of appropriate intensity. And so you're responding in a way that's appropriate for the behavior that's been demonstrated. Graduated, so you'll see this a lot. So you're responding for the level or the amount of time that they've been involved in the program. The way that you're applying a response should be appropriate to the time they've been in the program. So as you have a youth who's first coming into the program, you may have a lower level of response to a negative behavior because they're just then coming into the program. But as they continue to progress, you could see where the response might be heavier or more serious because they've been involved, they have grown, they're beginning to move towards, a later phase. So the response may have more weight because of the length of time that they've been involved in the program. And then always therapeutically sound, because this is a treatment environment, and it should correlate with where they are in their treatment plan. All right, next slide. Okay, these are some additional considerations, and you all can spend some more time thinking about this, but always, be understanding of the circumstances that are going on. And we know that all these youth are uniquely situated, and so there may be things that are going on at home or maybe happening in the community, and just being considerate of those things, being realistic and expecting setbacks at the start. So as they come into the court and as they progress, having that expectation that we're going to realistically respond to the needs, and to also be aware that when they're first coming into the program, they're just now getting acquainted with the team and with the court. And so there may be continued infractions or behavior that happen at the start of their case process. And then we always want to be mindful of youth development. So if you have an adult wellness court and your team has been working with adults, is there somebody on your team that can help you all as you start to relate with youth and start to work specifically with youth in a wellness court and respond in a developmentally appropriate way? Because the way that we respond to adults is going to look different than the way that we respond to youth. And just the way that we share information or communicate can also be different. And then always looking for underlying conditions. And so one of our team members has reminded me before in some of the trainings that we're doing, when a youth doesn't even have their basic needs met, food, water, shelter, clothing, always going into this with an understanding that we want to look at basic needs. And when basic needs aren't being met, we're going to see a lot of negative behavior. So I think that's important, especially in our communities where we see families that, are under-resourced, or you have a parent or caregiver is unemployed, or things that are going on in the home. Talked yesterday in our trauma-informed care session, there may be things that are happening at home that you don't necessarily know about at the start of the process. And so being willing to investigate underlying conditions and try to connect youth with resources that can help them, and knowing that when we're applying a consequence for negative behavior, it should be done with the best understanding that we have at that time, but being willing to look and see if there's some other conditions or things that are affecting that decision making. All right, so Antonia, if you can go to slide 33. The next couple of slides were some sharing information for you all, so we can skip those two. Okay, so this is just a picture of how you all can apply, and we actually want to get to share some example responses and incentives. And so this is everything we just talked about: immediate, consistent, individualized. We want to be appropriate in intensity, graduated, therapeutically sound. So are you going to be able to do it? Sounds hard, but it's not. Certain and fair. So we know that you all can do this. Christina Pacheco on our team, who works on the BJA team in the adult court, has shared this approach, and this is shared in other treatment court settings, but you can both give and take. So you can give a reward, so it's something that they're wanting. You can give a sanction, something they don't want. You can take, so you can remove something from them that's been applied, so they already have a sanction that's been applied to them. So you can take that away. You can also remove a reward. So if there's something like you let them be on the, I know we use the word rocket docket, so they get to be first up and they get to be first to leave. You can take that away. So say there was a negative behavior, that's something that you can take away. So there's give and take in this process. And then the next slide, we can go to the next slide, is just a visualization of intensity. So as they come into the program, when we use this word graduated, we talk about when they're initially coming in, you're not going to be responding with a really hefty negative response as the youth is coming in. But conversely, when the youth is coming into the program and you're celebrating their successes, you don't want to celebrate way too fast and be giving these big rewards, and then you have nowhere to go. So if you see this chart, it's almost like, let's be progressive with the way that we're incentivizing and responding to behavior so that we still have somewhere to go at the end. And we get a lot of questions about different types of incentives. What can we give? What are the things that we can use with our grant funding? And if you have individual questions about that and you're a tribal grantee, please email us, because if there's a question about the way that you use your funding, we have to connect with your OJJDP grants management specialist. But there are ways, because incentives are part of this program, to work with your grant management specialist, talk about the incentives that you're wanting to give, and then they can work with you on that list of things that you're hoping to offer as part of this approach. So we do get a lot of questions about that. So I just wanted to share with the group. Jacob and myself and others in our team, we can't give permission for the types of things that you're purchasing. And so I just want to clarify, the things that we share, you need to work with your grant management specialist on approvals for certain purchases. All right, let's go to the next slide. I think the next slide is just reiterating things that we've, I always like to reiterate during this session. And so I think we've talked a lot about due process and fairness. So I actually want to share a few examples, and then we're going to go into a breakout room for a few minutes and talk about some of these lists that we see, because we always get questions about actual lists. So Antonia, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, just so you know, enough of me talking. All right, so there are a lot of lists out there that you all can look at. And so I'm going to share a few, and we will put these in the packet for you to look at. But if you go to NDCI, this is a general list, so this is not specific to Juvenile Healing to Wellness Court. But I wanted to share it because I think it's helpful to see the categories, and you all can see verbal praise. A lot of people think, okay, well, it needs to be some tangible thing. Verbal praise means a lot to people. And so when someone says, hey, you're doing a great job, or you did really good at that, or like yesterday, someone, yeah, that was a great session yesterday. That means a lot. So for the youth that are coming into your program, this may seem minimal, but it actually, I think, can be very meaningful. I think it helps build that relationship, and you all can apply this across the board at any point in time, and it costs no money. Small tangible rewards. And so you'll see this is just an example list of various things. And since this is an adult, you'll see some things like bus tokens, and this might be for an urban area. We know in our rural communities, there might be a lot of varying things that don't match an urban community. But these are just examples. So books, cards, calendars, supplies, toiletries, some of these things, clothing, those things can mean a lot to people who, it's something that's meaningful to them. That's why it's important to consider what their interests and needs are. Recognition in court, I think this is really important, especially as we're trying to transition these perceptions of the judicial system and moving away from a negative connotation of the court system. So having the judge engage, encourage them, round of applause. We've seen the notes, a note from the judge, lunch with the team, things like that. There's also consideration for what we can take, a limitation that we can take away. So reduced community restrictions. So we just talked about that. And then special privileges. And so day trips, activities. Dave, when we go in our breakout rooms, feel free to share about some of the things you all do with the day trips and different activities, and then certain privileges. So maybe part of their case management plan is that, they weren't allowed to travel outside of the community for whatever reason, or, maybe there's a particular no contact order or something in place for the youth. So what are the privileges that can be given back for movement in a positive direction? So this is just one example. This will be in your packet, and then I have one more. I wanted to show you all the grid system. Let me stop sharing for 1 minute. Don't think there's anything weird on my screen, but just in case. Okay, so this is an example of a point or a grid system. And this is a tribal court. So this is a Tribal Juvenile Healing to Wellness court. And we talked about developing a point system for behaviors. And so you can see in their policies and procedures that things like verbal praise, small tangible rewards, recognition, symbolic rewards, and different accomplishments. And then reduce supervision, reduce community restrictions, moderate tangible rewards. So as you can see, it's scaled similar to that list that we just looked at, but you can see the implementation of a point system here. And when we talked about clarity and certainty and understandable, the youth has those expectations. So they know what could happen for both positive and negative behaviors. I think that's really important. And so you all can use this as well. We'll send this out. Okay. We'll look at this really quickly. Sorry, I know we're getting close to our time. Okay, I would like to go into breakouts for just a minute. I want to hear from you all. We'll pull up these lists of incentives and sanctions on our screen. So if we can go to breakout rooms for just a couple of minutes and go into our small groups, we'll look at a list and maybe talk about, why we think these would work for our youth and why they wouldn't. So let's go ahead and do that. And we may run a couple minutes over, but I think it's important to share. The world's shortest breakout sessions. We had some great things shared though. I was fortunate. Dave in my group, Dave shared, they moved away from electronic items to cultural items. And then Dave, I liked how you shared giving the case managers the authority to both give that incentive and then also to discipline. So that helps with that immediacy. So just wanted to share that.
In our discussion, we really, we were just getting kind of into it, but this is where your partners come in as well. They might have funding that allows a little more variability. It's important to bring your partners in, you know, on all different levels, but I mean, if you are thinking about it, this is prevention. There's, you know, to me, it makes sense for prevention money to help with the healing to wellness court. It's treatment. It makes sense to have money go into healing to wellness. So please reach out to your different departments and see what other, you know, grants and things are within the community to partner for possible assistance with the incentives.
And during our brief elevator convo, we're lucky to have Chenille talk about her court's creative approach to having the bucks with the picture of the judge on them. It was pretty funny. And then, you know, the fish tank approach where the participant gets to, you know, pick, and then sometimes there's a prize and sometimes there's motivational quotes. And then also examples of going to events, giving tickets for families to attend together, and then just getting creative based on participant interest.
Thank you. I wanted us to quickly have time to go into our groups, but we're fortunate that we're about to do a panel so we can talk more. I love Chenille sharing about their bucks. So we can bring that up again during our panel discussion. That would be great. So let's go ahead. Antonio, if you can scroll to the end, I think there's a slide about data, and I know we need to wrap up because we are going to get close to our next session. So we shared a lot about examples. I know we shared a list. There will be an example list you can move forward in your packet of materials. And we've talked about tying these incentives to specifically to their interests and their needs, so making them goal oriented. But just wrapping up, I know we had a brief mention of data collection and program evaluation, but I think part of what we're doing is the work that we're doing. Is it effective, and is it making change in the community? And I think we want our efforts to demonstrate, you know, our hopes, what we're working toward. And I think that is helping these youth to get on a better path. And so in all the aspects of the court that we're trying to bring in, going back to that. And so when you all see these different methodologies or point system, I think, you know, what Dave shared earlier and what Erin shared is yes, this is tied to funding. This is a grant funded program, and there are some things that we need to do with reporting, but I think our responsiveness also needs to be related to how we're connecting with the youth, how long-term we're tying them into the community and placing them on a new path, and then also considering the ways that we're doing our work. And so it is important to be collecting data for what we're administering and how we're doing it, and that can help you all as you're making decisions on how you're applying this as you continue your program or grow your program. I know I just shared, Dave was saying they moved away from electronics and tried to increase those cultural things that they were giving as a reward. And so, you know, what impacted that decision, you know, what was that transition from? And I think that's from learning, you know, this is what we were doing and we changed that because of blank. And so you're only going to know that if you're taking the time to consider that data and the ways that you're doing this work. And Erin, I know you love data. So if you want to share anything about that before we close the session out.
No, I think you did a great job.
All right, I think we can go to the end, and we are going to be back here at 1/4 to the hour. And I know we could probably add our questions and discussions in our next session because we are going to do a panel. So if you have any lingering questions about incentives and sanctions, feel free to email us directly. We're here. We want to support you in whatever way is helpful. Dave and Chanel have a lot of great experience in their wellness courts and how they've seen youth receive certain things. So just encourage you to outreach them as well. And thank you all for being a part of Module 5. And thank you, Erin, for taking time out of your schedule to be a part of this session.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. See you in just a few minutes.